Hi guys, well I managed to have my voice back and I've managed to get all the assignments for portfolios for intake 1 done, so I'm back to doing videos. My apologies for last week, but yeah, I suspect you survived without it for at least 1 week. Okay, we'll get stuck in, shall we? And now this recoloring stuff comes in useful for a number of things, not only restoration of old photos, but you can utilize the same techniques if you've got somebody's skin tone that's going a bit skew, desaturate it and add the color back in. So it is a useful technique. Same thing if you've got a tree that's or a dress that's been overexposed and you've recovered it back, you've got some detail in there, but the colour's all gone. So yeah, it can be quite a useful function. So obviously, who are we up to first? Dan is yours. Image size is fine, which is I'd expect by this stage, and looking at your power lines and power poles, you've done a really nice job of getting those to bend and sway. I'd possibly say this one's a little bit overdone, but yeah, doesn't matter. I'm not going to be that picky on. The fact is you've got the thickness about right and you've got those curves happening, so that's good. In terms of the truck recoloring, you've got some of it working well. In that you're using the right blend modes and you've picked up lots of different pieces of them. And as you said, it takes a long time to do, but it still needs some more refining to really get those edges behaving themselves in all the pieces. Some of the spokes aren't quite right. You've got a bit of colour bleed underneath the truck and behind here. You've not brought the colour all the way up to the edge on these ones. There's this chip out of this, so it's okay, but it's it's not as good as it could be. You've got the back window open, which is good, and you have used multiple hues on the wood, so yeah, there are a number of things in there that are working. So just pause this for a second. So in terms of the person, jacket and the tie you've coloured in nicely, which is good. The saturation of the orange on his face is a little bit overcooked, but it is nice to see that you've actually used multiple colours on there. But yeah, I would tone that down a fraction more than it is. Let's grab there's no reason I can't do it, and just pull that back a touch. Just using the saturation. There we go. So yeah, it doesn't need very much to just bring that back, but oh, now I've pushed it too far. There we go. So yeah, just a fraction over orange in the saturation. Your background, you've got some good stuff going on there, in that you've blurred things out, but you've still got a white line around the edge, which is something you want to try and avoid. And this tree, actually I think this is the top of the house. Never mind, it's green, but it's hard enough to tell in the text. It could be something sticking on the wood pile, but it does have that little bit of a green edge around there and a white edge around there. So a lot of your masking is very good, but it's just there's a little bit that's slipped. There's a touch on this backboard that's gone as well. And in terms of the text on the door, you've started to get the aging done. It would have been good to go with a different color, I think. And the line that text follows needs to be tipped up just a little bit. It's just a fraction flat. And then the next step is to actually bend it so that it goes into the bumps on the door. I do, however, like what you've done with turning the lights on and putting some colour in the sky. That's quite a nice touch. Right, Adrian, let's have a look at yours, and as I'd expect, the image sizing is all good. Your sky, you've done a nice job of. This a little bit of noise in there, which is what you want for this aged image, and it's out of focus, which is good. It matches the what's happening in the background there. You've got your power lines working quite nicely with a good curve on them. In terms of the recoloring, you've only included one hue in the wood. It's lacking that multi-hued dimension. Otherwise, the masking and things that you've done for the truck is really good. That comes together really well. The recoloring on the person, you've got all the jackets and stuff different colours, and you've put in a different colour for his eyes, which is nice to see. The skin tone's probably very similar to the face, to the hair. It probably would be a good idea to just add an extra colour in patches, just subtly to change that, because it adds a little bit more reality to a face. The background, you've done a nice job of masking, but what you then need to do is put it all in one layer and blur it slightly, because as you can see in the background, everything's blurred, but your color lines aren't, and that's quite a trick to get that particular piece behaving. And the text, you've done quite nicely. You've got that distortion there, in terms of it fitting the line of the door, and it looks aged. It's just getting it to actually fit into those slats would be the next step with that one. So well done. Right, Tiofa. Well, when I first looked at this, I was trying to work out what is this line running across the whole of the image. Reading your piece of blurb, I'm presuming this is the gloss effect. It doesn't work. It looks more like something that's been accidentally left on as a layer, rather than giving the effect of a gloss photo. The only time that I would try and add a gloss effect to a photo is if you're trying to sit a photo into a three-dimensional scene. Other than that, adding it to a restoration is not actually restoring the image. It ends up being degrading it, which is, so yeah, something that's best avoided from that point of view. But good idea for trying it. It's certainly not going to knock you for having a go at it, but yeah, the idea is the restoration rather than adding other things into it that just aren't quite going to work. The sky's looking pretty reasonable. There is, however, a gap in your light fitting, which is not quite behaving itself. And the masking around the edge of those is pretty good. The bend on your power lines needs to be quite soft, and it needs to go and curve into that middle piece, whereas it looks like you've curved them quite tightly at the beginning, and they don't continue to sag, and they go into a straight line at the end. That's not quite working from that point of view. Have a look at have a look in old photos how power lines work, because they string them now and under much higher tension, which is why they don't sag as much. The recoloring of the truck, you certainly got the right idea behind it. Things like the wood needs to have multiple colours if you want it to look really realistic, and this back here should be a different tone to the rest of the truck itself. But at least you've opened up that back window, which is nice to see. The recoloring in the background, you need to be a bit more careful with your masking so that it doesn't overlap. You've got quite a few edges where things have overlapped on one layer over the top of the next, and so it doesn't blend in and sit together quite as well. Text effect on the door is looking pretty good. Again, it's just that ability to make it bend into the the slats to make it really realistic. So yeah, there's some good things happening in there. Right, Rebecca, let's have a look at yours. And as I'd expect by this stage, the images are behaving themselves in terms of size, which is good. The sky, it's on the way to getting there. You've blurred it out and added the noise, which is good. But in blurring out the sky, I think you've ended up blurring out the mask that you did for the pole, which is unfortunate. So when you did that blur, you needed to have unlocked the layer mask, and that should have solved that problem. So there's a bit of work to do with that masking there, which is interesting because you've not had that problem when you've put the mask on the trees, on the background of the wood. There is also a house hiding under there, unfortunately, and you've coloured that green as well. In fact, it looks like you've kind of used that same green tone throughout most of the truck, which is a little unfortunate really. It's only the cab that you want that one colour, and then your spare tyre is going to be the same as your other tyres. Your wood needs to be different colours, but not green, and then this wood is also wood, and therefore needs to be aged as such. So the power lines, they've got a bit of a bend on them at each end, but that bend should really come and be spread over the whole of the line, but it is nice and thin. You've not got ended up using a weird thickness, and for the most part they come up to those crossbars nicely. There's a bit of a crossover here. I think this one should have actually probably gone underneath and behind this bar, and then it would have made a little bit more sense. You've done a nice job on the clothes of the guy, which is good to see. And the background is pretty well done. It's just getting this halo around the that back edge sorted out, and part of that is to actually soften this whole edge to blur it into a similar density to the rest of the image. Obviously, once you do that, you then have to add all of that texture, which I don't think I can. No, that's noise reduction. I can't do it in Lightroom. Have to do that in Photoshop. And the other thing was the text. You've got the right idea there. There's some parts that are looking quite well aged. There's the corner of the E that's a bit on the strong side, and then of course the next step is to make sure it actually looks like it's tipping into the grooves of the wood as well. But yeah, cool. And Tricia, let's have a look at your one, and images size correctly, which, as I said, keep saying I'd expect by now, which is good. Your power pole's really nicely masked, and you've got those curves happening really well with the power lines. Great to see the one that's going below and behind this object is ducking in. Oh, just a really quick thing, and the overall image is a little bit on the dark side. I've ended up having to pull the shadows up just so I can actually see what's going on a little bit more. Partly that I think that's to do with the fact that you've ended up colouring in the truck purple, but yeah, it was just a little bit on the dark side. In terms of the recolouring of the truck, you've done a really nice job of putting in that detail around the wood and actually chucking back on the wood, which is cool to see. You did miss the detail on the wheels where these spokes are actually wooden and end up being a different colour to the rest of it, and there's also a set of spokes underneath there as well. But nice to see you've got that back window open. And in terms of the recolouring of the person, good job on the jacket and things. if you add more colours to the face, it's going to look more realistic. And given we've got a person in there, you want to add that extra detail to the face, because that's one of the places that you can look at. Recolouring of the background, that's working quite well. Again, that's once you've got everything masked out, blurring the whole thing just a little bit to soften it helps it to sit in and be out of focus and match the background itself. The text, the age isn't showing through too much, and for some reason the 9 and the E are looking a little bit bigger than I'd expect them to be. I think you've slightly overdone that adjustment when you were playing with the size and perspective. The change in perspective size is not as big as you've made it, and that's not a particularly easy one to do. Probably the easiest option is to look at how much that changes between the top of the door and the top and the bottom of the door in both pieces, and it is there, but it's fairly subtle. I think you just got a little bit carried away when making that adjustment. But other than that, it's looking pretty decent. Right, Louise, yeah, you're quite right. These ones are a horrendously time-consuming task, and I think that on average, most students spend about half as much to double the amount of time on their Photoshop papers as they do the photography. I'm not saying that that's actually right. I'm thinking a lot of times students don't necessarily spend the amount of time on their photography papers as they actually should, but yeah, well, there's no way around shortcutting the Photoshop one. Now, I'll just point out the biggest glitch that you've got in your image first, and that is some of your blend modes haven't been set correctly. Particularly this yellow that you've put on the wood needed to be set to that colour or overlay, and you've, from the looks of it, left it as normal. Might have dropped the transparency a little bit, but that's why we've got this opaque layer over it, and there's a bit of yellow and a bit of orange and a bit of purple here that haven't had their colours changed either, the blend mode changed either, and that, yeah, lets down the image overall, unfortunately. Excuse me, I better say goodbye to my daughter. Oh dear, yeah, small person heading off to school. One of the advantages of working from home. So where were we? The other thing that you would find useful to be able to do is, particularly on something like this orange, you've masked it pretty well, but the colour's too intense, so what you need to do for that one is to slide that opacity slider back. Keep the blend mode as you've got it, but that'll reduce the colour intensity quite easily. And similar issue with the person's face and hand, and it would have been nice to have a colour added to the tie, but yeah, need to go for a little bit more in terms of subtlety on the job done. Again, if you change the blend mode, then you should be able to allow some of the texture to come through the text, and that would have helped as well. It is good to see that you've worked out how to line that up with the door, so yeah. Right, Rick, let's have a look at your one, and as I expect, your image size is all behaving itself, which is good. Asking around the power pole is really nice and neat. That's great to see. And I see that you've brought the power lines forward and made them thicker as they're coming towards us, which is kind of cool. It does look a little bit distracting because it all bunches up into a fairly big black blob at this point, but I can still see where you're going with it, so yeah, that's alright. I mean, I can see that you're playing with perspective. I think possibly just a little bit overdone. In terms of the recolouring of the van, it's working pretty well. Where I would start changing things is you've got an insert here looking through a window into the paint inside, and really that paint inside is going to be a different color or hue or intensity. It's not going to be exactly the same as the outside one, so that would have been good to change. You've done a nice job of the jacket. The face, there's a patch here that's not been particularly well feathered, and I think you've probably looked at it and gone, oh, it's a bit pink, and therefore put a blob of paint on there to change the colour, but it's not been blended in quite as well as it could do. In terms of your background, the trees are a bit on the vicious green side. The same trick that I mentioned to some of the other students, just drop your opacity slider so that it doesn't quite give you that same colour, but generally your masking and stuff here is good, and you've feathered edges and things to help them to blend in, and for the most part you haven't gone and overlapped the colours. There's a little bit of work that could have been tidied up where you've got a touch of grey between the two, but it's pretty good. And text wise, you've got that texture coming through, which works well, and again it's just getting that bend in the door so that it actually looks like it's sitting on a 3D surface as well. So well done. Right, Shireen, you've mentioned in your submission that the power lines gave you a lot of trouble and they didn't show you up. They showed up in the PSD file but not in the final JPEG. So what do you need to do about that? You need to email me before you put the submission in so that I can show you what's going wrong. Without that email and without the screenshot, I can't problem solve, and I can't give you marks for something that you haven't fixed. So please, next time, drop me an email. Make sure you give yourself enough time to get those emails in and get back to me. In terms of the masking, you've done some pieces really nicely. This edge along here is behaving itself really well, but then you've got little patches like this where you've jumped in and this is the edge of a house and it's somehow vanished, and you've got the edge of your power pole which is not particularly tidy, and often with straight lines the best option is to get that get one of the pen tools and actually clip that out manually, rather than trying to let me show you. It's going to be easier. I'll pause this for a second. Alright, so let's take the edge of this power pole. We know we've got a straight line that we need, so grab the polygon lasso tool and zoom in. I'll zoom in until we get to the point that we really want, and we're going to grab that edge and, well, we're going to go down past this, which is past the past the lamp, but that's fine. So grab that, and that's the area we want. Okay, so that's going to be a nice straight line, and in fact we can fix that corner. There we go. Double click, and that gives us our selection. So you'll note I've got the feathering set to 0, and then obviously I'd be working on the layer mask. That in this case is probably the sky, so reveal selection. So if I backslash that, you can see that that would be letting through that part of the sky. Now obviously I'd have to go through and mask up all of this using that selection tool. Oops, backspace 1, so that I can actually go back and fix up that. And then I might need to go back and say add some of that detail that I've cut out manually with, that was silly, shouldn't have clicked that when I did. Like the lamp fitting, I might end up going and painting that in with a small brush because it's curves and things and it's easier to do. But things like the edge of this bar, it's going to be a very straight line. It's going to have straight corners. So using that selection, grabbing your paintbrush and then painting that area in Oh, you won't be able to see what I'm doing. Let's just use the fill tool and fill this with a totally random colour. There we go. So that's the area that I've been working on, but you can see how you get a much straighter line by doing that rather than ending up with rounded corners. Now, if you really want to still use the tools that your paintbrush and bits and pieces, and you've got corners like this, then there are ways around it. Let me just hit the right key so I can zoom in further. And the key way of doing it is you simply get a smaller and smaller brush and start from the corner and paint in. Now that's not going to work. And just do it with a tiny brush. It takes a lot longer to do, but will let you get into those corners and give you a nice clean edge to it rather than a curve. But when you're doing this, you also need to be careful that you don't end up leaving patches of, in this case it looks like a patch of the original there, and it takes time. So it's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it, which is why I'd suggest using the other clone tools, but you don't want to leave those white halos around things either. So yeah, hopefully that's of some help, and if you drop me an email about the power lines, then I can see whether or not I can help you on that one, because it is a tool that you will probably end up using at some other stage, particularly if you end up going and doing Photoshop in 200 level. You end up using it for drawing an eye, and so you need to be able to use those curve tools to get them to behave themselves. Alright, so that's it for this week. I've got a couple of people who have had extensions, and I will be getting on with doing some catch-up marking on those once I've got my work for what are you guys doing, 103. So what have I got to play with this week? I think I've got some landscapes, look forward to doing those. Alright guys, have a good week, catch you later.